Good morning and welcome to another week of Patrick and Casey. Here we are talking about chapter 9 of Disciple Making Parent. Now, chapter 9 talks about teaching your children about the spirit and the flesh and how those two compete against each other within us at all times.
Wow.
And I know that's a tough subject to talk about, especially I know like we always talk about how our children are young and little, but we also always refer and think about teenagers, students that are older. And so I think this might apply a little more to those older students and students in general, maybe middle school up. But for all of us as parents, we're probably dealing with this ourselves.
Yeah, and I think we actually have to learn this really and kind of wrestle with this idea first before we can begin to really even pass this on to our students. So I would like to read a verse in Colossians. As many of you know that have students, we've been going through that this fall. And so this is a verse that kind of displays a little bit about what this darkness and light really look like. And so it's Colossians 1. We're going to begin in verse 13 and read 13 and 14. So it says, "He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." So we see in that passage really two drastically different ideas here.
Okay.
And so we see the flesh, which is talking about the domain of darkness, and then you have the light, which is ultimately the kingdom of the beloved Son. And so trying to really walk through and understand the two can be tough. And so how do we begin to do this? Especially, so students, we did just walk through this in Colossians, but when it comes to children and really, I mean, I have toddlers at home. I mean, how are we going to, I've been thinking through that, to engage and let them know, hey, you know, this is a sinful behavior. This is something that we're doing. You know, you do this, I do this, but we have a Lord that loves us and doesn't want us to continue in that sin.
Right. So I think one of the things is just simply acknowledging in your house, no matter how old maybe your children are, as long as they're old enough to understand that they do wrong, is there's a battle that's always waging inside all of us, whether to choose sin or whether to choose to listen to that voice of the Spirit maybe saying, don't do that. That's not the right choice. And I think sometimes what I see, sometimes in myself, sometimes in my children, is the battle for sin sometimes rages a lot more, a lot louder, and so that's one of the things is teaching to listen to the right voice and knowing if there's a voice screaming at you loud, it may not be the right voice. And I think about a lot of times when we get frustrated over something, we just really have this tendency to want to act out, to want to yell, to want to demonstrate so others can see, how whatever we're feeling, whatever we're doing, whatever we're dealing with, we want it to become outward. And I think that voice is saying, let it out. Just let it out for everyone. It's probably the wrong voice. So it's just starting off kind of teaching some of those methods maybe to our children, even to ourselves of, pausing. A lot of times I know we talk, like Hartley, my youngest daughter, talks about pausing and counting to 4. I think some of those methods
that
are
Daniel
really,
Tiger thing, right? Is that what it is?
That's right. Don't roar, count
We've been
to 4.
watching that, and man, that's been huge for us.
Right. So I think some methods like that are just helpful because counting to 4 maybe helps you stop to think about what you're actually doing or about to do.
Right. Well, it pauses and it doesn't make you react.
Right.
Because I think a lot of times when you said that we just want to kind of outburst what we're feeling inside.
Right.
When we pause and take those couple of seconds, especially at those younger ages, we're able to kind of, in a way, gain composure of saying, I'm not going to just react and go forward and continue in when I'm already experiencing.
Right.
And so actually, I also think that in a young age specifically, we're told to obey our parents. And I think that's a starting point of how we can continue to obey them and learn how to do that. Now, I think that leads into this kind of next part is that the goal in this between darkness and light, darkness and light, we're ultimately born with a sin nature.
Right.
And, when we come and have, by faith, by grace through faith, accept Christ, ultimately, now we're in a complete, the war has been raging for years and years.
Right.
But now we're engaging, and now we have the Holy Spirit that helps guide us through that. And that's that softer voice that we want to listen and hear.
Yeah.
But when I was talking about how do we obey when it comes to, or really not obey, but help me out here.
Well, I think maybe what I heard you saying even a minute ago, I think is the idea of we're now pleasing God versus man. And I think at a young age,
there you go.
And sometimes even as teenagers or even as adults, we're most focused on, what are they going to say? What are they going to do? But a part of this, and back to maybe one of your original questions is how do we help people, our children or ourselves understand it, is let's focus first on, God's already won the battle for us. So he already knows and loves us. So when we mess up, when we struggle with sin, it's like God knows this. And we're here to please God, to love God, to know God more than, the darkness or Satan or sin. And so pleasing God is something that no matter how bad we are or how good we are, we're already doing that by our life and by our testimony of who he's changed us.
Yes, and I think, thanks for helping me out here. I got a little stuck.
Yeah.
But that idea of pleasing God and not man, a lot of times we're told and we're taught ultimately at a young age, hey, let's obey our parents.
Right.
That's something that God is telling us to do. Let's do that in obedience. And so that's where that obedience part was coming in.
Yeah.
But the problem I think that happens is that stays with us for almost ever.
It's hard to let go of that.
Yeah, because it's something that's ingrained in us. And the reality is ultimately we're doing that to please God ultimately, but sometimes we don't see that at that younger age.
I think I remember even last week. I like that we're doing it now weekly because I remember last week talking about this one thing of as parents sometimes we say, obey me because I said so. And that one thing, it kind of connects to this because ultimately we could say, hey, obey me or do the right thing or do the thing that you know to do and not the thing you shouldn't do. Because it's not to obey me, it's again to honor God.
Right.
Which, if you have that relationship already established, if you've been a follower of Jesus, become a follower, and committed your life to Him, then you've made that commitment. So, don't just do the right thing. Don't just pause from bursting in anger because me or you or, a parent said so.
That's right.
But ultimately, because it honors God when we pause and don't let our anger burst out of us when we're slow to anger.
And I think that really brings us to this next point of we need to have grace in our homes. We've talked about how, the difference between flesh and spirit. We're looking at pleasing God, not man.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think this starts in the home.
Right.
And showing grace there. So how do we do that? Like one of the things I've been thinking through, so specifically with students, has to do with these. You know?
Oh, phones?
Oh, and I actually think I want to go ahead and allude to next week of having that heart connection with both parent and student. But I think this can cause some dissension between both our teens and our parents of like, hey, get off your phone. I want to have some time with you, or answer me this, or stop playing the games. And or, like on the other hand, it might be the student that's saying like, hey, I really want to have some more time.
What'd you say?
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, I asked you a question. Did you hear me?
I didn't hear you.
What was Facebook saying? I mean, or Instagram.
Right, that's what happens, right?
But I feel like that's the reality, right? And so, how do we have a graceful home? Well, I think a part of that is there, but it's also alluding back to that counting to 4 kind of idea of just, hey, whenever something happens, don't react.
Right.
Take some time and try and be led by the Holy Spirit of saying, like, I'm upset about this, and I need to, so that I am not continuing in sin, take some time so that I can come back and address this issue.
So having grace in the home, does that mean, though, that we don't have expectations and requirements? And
absolutely not.
No.
Right. Because the reality is we all have laws. I mean, the Bible lays out laws for us, and they're for our good, ultimately.
So we can still have expectations, requirements, guidelines to follow. And then in that, we have to have grace.
Yes, and the grace thing, see, I think sometimes we segment these characteristics of God.
Right.
So we segment love, we segment grace, we segment mercy, we segment, justice.
What does that mean by segment?
So what I mean is that sometimes we take and go, I want to focus on this one thing. So right now we're talking about grace. And so we're only going to talk about grace.
Right.
But the reality is a part of God's grace is all of it combined.
Right.
I mean, that's what I love about reading the Bible and learning more about him, is it's all interconnected. So God's grace, love, mercy, and justice are all interwoven together.
Right.
And so we can't just take one out and say, this is the only thing that we're going to segment and talk about today. So it's almost a black and white. Like, okay, this is black and all that's white right now. And so I want to focus on this one thing.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that it's all woven together. And so when it comes to grace and justice, we can still be graceful, but also, be just in what we're doing as well. So if something happens in our home, we can handle it with grace, but also still have that consequence. Because the reality is consequences don't just go away if we just wish them that way.
Oh, right.
And so we do need to answer, and we do need to have those in our life so that we understand. Really, the whole point of those things is to understand the brevity or the weight of our sin.
Right. That's the one thing I think about when it comes to consequences in our home, is that for me as a parent, I'm hoping, and when I give a consequence in a home or discipline my children, it's teaching them, when you become an adult and you make a decision that isn't the best or is a wrong decision, there's going to be bigger, different consequences for us as adults.
Absolutely.
And so I want you to learn now, doing this at home, which was wrong, has a consequence, but you're going to be able to get over it and move past it, and I'm going to forgive you and have grace with you. But, man, learn now, when we choose wrongly, there's consequences, and those only get worse as we get older. We get older. I mean, a speeding ticket is a hard consequence to have to tackle, or, I mean, doing worse things with our jobs or our employment places, things that we do, and those have just bigger life, huge consequences.
And I think we kind of miss the goal sometimes, because we then we can get to a place where we begin to dislike the people who are executing said consequence. So if you're a student here and your parents have given you a consequence, guys, it's because you've deserved it. And the reality here is that we want this consequence that has been given to you to really stay with you, of saying,
to teach
you. Because the thing is like, whenever we get a speeding ticket and we have that fine, man, they've gotten more and more expensive. I've never gotten one, so my wife knows. But maybe not. I don't know about that.
Some people out there that know.
Either way. But the whole thing is that the whole point of those things is to really encourage us in a certain way by consequence to not do it again. And so it's ultimately for our good, because it's dangerous to do what we had been doing in that speeding ticket. So the same thing applies in the home. It can be dangerous for what we are going forward and doing. And so we can still say, hey, this is your consequence, and this is something I said and something I'm going to stick to. No, even in all of this, I still love you, but we're going to have to walk through this together. So you know what that may mean? They may lose some driving privileges. Have you ever thought? I mean, I've heard of that before. Of like, well, you say that past your curfew, well, now you can't drive for a week. And that's a tough week. And actually, it's tougher on the parent, because they have to start driving people everywhere.
I've heard that.
So
ultimately, when we're talking about this chapter, I mean, it could involve so many things. Between listening to the Spirit or listening to our flesh, there's always going to be that battle within all of us, whether we have young ones or whether we have grade school, middle school, or teenage driving, high schoolers. Or even older. I know a lot of parents that tell me that the battle of helping your children doesn't change once they become adult children.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is just going to be a continued battle. And so that's why I'm looking forward again to next week. Every chapter, I think we say that, but I think every chapter in the next topic and subject really helps us to connect the last one. And so next week's going to be chapter 10, making the heart connection a priority. Because I think with discipline, with teaching your children, the battle of listening to the Spirit and listening to that voice of saying do wrong, man, when it comes to our heart connection as parents to our children, I think that's when that really comes into play.
Absolutely. And I remember, there was videos ago, probably maybe 5 or 6 ago, where we had the heart connection, even the 2-part. So I'm excited about what that chapter is going to look like and how we can begin to bring some practical examples of how can we build better heart connections with our own family. So maybe we might even address the spouse next week and
you
our
already
students.
did today, though.
A little bit. That's right. So awesome. We look forward to seeing you guys next week as we continue this series on Disciple Making Parent.